Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Good afternoon. It is the 30th of August, and we've got some good stuff for you. But first, I want to mention that there's still civil unrest in all across the country. A person got shot in Portland. A counter-protester, part of a caravan of counter-protesters, got shot. And the chief of police of Portland says, "This violence is completely unacceptable, and we are working diligently to find and apprehend the individual or individuals responsible." And, you know, time will tell if that's just lip service, because we have plenty of examples of people being shot all over the country, and, you know, it really depends on the optics of the situation that determines whether or not justice is served, or if it's, you know, undue justice. There is a confirmed reinfection of COVID in Nevada. A man has contracted the one of the other COVID viruses out there, and so it looks like, you know, we might get some vaccines, but they might not be for the version of SARS-CoV-2 that exists at the time. But on a lighter note, Elon Musk has implanted chips in some 19 animals with, 87% of the animals, totaling 19, had successful implants, meaning they didn't die. And I kind of want to dive into this technology because these are cyborg animals at this point. He's created a cyborg petting zoo. And I'm using the term cyborg really loosely because I don't think that these animals are returning any meaningful data. I mean, they might be able to respond with some kind of like pain response if they get prodded, but I don't think they're going to, factor polynomials or drive his cars around for him or conduct experiments like themselves.
So there's also a lot of misrepresentation by the media about what this company has done relative to what the industry has done. Because wet interfaces where you're actually integrating some sort of computer interface chip or some sort, whether it's a control module or mechanism with some part of actual wet matter that needs invasive surgery to install. That's been happening for decades,
Yeah.
and to varying degrees of success. So the company, the issue is like, here's the problem. When the media is trying to present these stories, they don't know anything about where the industry is. So they're just taking a press release from this company and just publishing it. So if this company says, we're the first to do this, the media doesn't actually have any onus to do academic research because that's not their job. They're not responsible for doing peer reviews on claims like that. So when there are news stories about these things, a lot of times, if you say you're the first doing something, unless somebody comes out and writes an article saying that you're not, nobody's going to know the difference. And then even if the person writes an article saying you're not, by then the damage is already done and people have moved on to a different story and they're none the wiser.
Yeah.
So then going back as far as like 2017, other companies have successfully used brain chip interfaces to have people be able to type. So there are other companies and other entities that are already on. This company is just in the stage that they're still trying with animals because they're not. So another aspect that needs to be discussed, and I am qualified to discuss this because not only is one of my degrees in psychology, I have actually worked in a brain scanning laboratory. The brain is still not understood. They do not have the brain decoded in a way where you can say, this brain wave means X, this brain wave means Y. That we are not at that level with understanding brain waves. So when someone is saying that they can insert a chip into the brain, yeah, that's not a difficult problem. It's the language of the brain that's the difficulty, because we don't know the language of the brain yet. We are probably at least 5 years out from actually understanding how the brain works on that level to get it to a point where it's actually functional. And this is where, when Tien's saying, oh, they probably can't factor polynomials, like, yeah, this is okay. If I'll say it like this, if we can't identify where consciousness exists in the brain, which we have not, which is not even necessarily a thing that we can do because we don't understand consciousness yet to the point to say that it's even possible. If we're not even at that point, not only will a pig not be able to factor polynomials, it'll effectively be just somebody getting the remote control over that pig, and it doesn't actually give the pig any more capabilities. And then on top of that, if this thing is going inside someone, you have to think about how long it actually lasts and doesn't start to break down, because what they found out is that chips that are installed in the body have a shelf life of about 18 to 25 years at the longest end, um, before they start actually being, they start breaking down and start becoming a danger to that person by existing inside their person. So this is like, there's all these aspects of what, like the way that this company and Elon are presenting it, it's just a big fucking like Ponzi scheme to get people to invest in their company. And then they're going to turn around in 5 years and be like, yeah, we haven't made that much progress, because it's a lot more difficult than we thought. And nobody's going to be any the wiser, because it plays out over such a long time that if you don't have an attention span that's long enough to actually track these industries or academic areas, then it's going to seem like they've made a shitload of progress when in fact they're like way behind the most advanced areas in the field. And that's the craziest shit about it, is like the media just eats these narratives up and just run with them, because they don't have to do the research. They don't have to be right about the actual field. They just have to report what Elon put in the press release. That's the
Elon Musk, the new P.T. Barnum of cybernetic implants.
man.
You raised a really good point about cyberization of the brain, or just cyberization in general. There's very little dialogue about the eventual toxicity of implants. Like, I don't think that it's a concept within cyborg-themed anime yet. I'm hoping that they eventually start talking about it. I've definitely never encountered the concept in pop culture, like in the media, in movies where they have cyborgs. Although Geordi did get his eyesight back during Insurrection, and his eyes rejected the implants. That's different.
And he actually had to get his
Implants put back in.
often,
Yeah.
even before
Oh, that's right.
nose, which it was a weird ableist line of character writing. That's, when I go back and watch these things where it's like, oh, this dude has implants and they're focusing on the implants to make it cool, and then they do these weird things about like writing the character as if now he is identifying more with the implants than being a human. It's like on the one hand, yeah, I get it. That's possible, but then when you talk to other abled people or differently abled people, it's like these types of characters end up just becoming mechanisms to make non able people feel better about looking at differently abled people. And it's like that again becomes, it's because they really don't broach these concepts of, oh, this dude with the, or whatever woman with the cybernetic arm implants has to get them updated every fucking 10 years because that shit degenerates. They never talk about that shit on anything. Like, very, very rarely will any sort of medium discuss that aspect of implants, because it's not really something that the journalists are versed enough to understand as a nuance, so they don't do it. And then the sci-fi aspect doesn't necessarily even have time to go into it. Or
there was that one time that Picard's a cyborg, and they never talk about it. He's got an artificial heart, and he had to get it replaced at one point. But that was more about flying in the super doctor at the last minute, and a retrospective on Picard's life. And that was a Q story too. But
right, but his heart implant doesn't make him differently abled.
It doesn't.
Like existence in his physical body.
Yeah, it's just a direct replacement.
Yeah, it's just a yeah, like you said, it's just a mechanism to get that storyline.
Yeah.
So that again, these are the reasons why, when we're talking about this, it sounds like the most boring part of Cyborgs, but it is. And in that, there's this aspect of it's the boring things that get overlooked that end up becoming the biggest problems, because people are trying to focus on the sexy things and like the most functional, most useful sides, to then be like, oh, these things are, you got to deal with them at some point, but let's not deal with them now. And then when the 18 years rolls around and that person's implant is starting to deteriorate, then that industry usually has not done enough research into that area, because they've justified overlooking it for so long. And this happens over and over, where it's the speculative investors driving industry that end up justifying never looking at the academically founded theories, because they are
Oh, you cut out for a second there.
so disconnected from the things that are coming. Learn about the research side. So then it becomes this circle of getting further and further away from what has actually been done, and what the journalists are saying is the forefront, just because the journalists are arbitrarily reporting these companies' press releases.
This is actually a fairly common trend that we've observed with quite a few, scientific breakthroughs from the private sector, where journalism is so involved in getting the story out first, because got to get those clicks, that they will rush the story. But this is, as you've pointed out, this is actually a little bit more dangerous, because this requires a level of depth that we don't really see presented by our news reporting agencies.
Yeah, they both don't have the onus, and they don't have the research understanding to then go back far enough to then be able to say, oh, here's proof right here that not only is this pig implant very overstated in its relevance, it's not relevant at all. And that's why, again, when the media is reporting these things, and just then one media source says it, and then everybody else parrots them, because then if you dissent against what the media is saying, even with fact-checked research, they have enough voices to then turn around and point at you and ridicule you and say, oh, look at this person with their academic sources. They look all crazy. Look at them waving around their papers, and they can't hold the papers. They keep dropping their papers. You're going to listen to this guy who's got all these papers, and it turns into this ridicule to discredit the source, and then people eat that shit up, and it's this weird, the more voices that are saying something, the more valid it becomes, rather than the accuracy
of the information.
Yeah, the accuracy is irrelevant.
So it just occurred to me that so when Tesla finally started delivering cars, Elon, he magnanimously provided all of the patent information. He just put it out there and said, here, use this information. And it occurs to me that he didn't actually develop that engineers and scientists developed that information.
Right, and he owns it.
He owns it.
You go into his company.
Well, yeah, if you produce information, data, or content under the employment of a company, they own it typically.
Basically, an empty gesture to make him look good, because what are you gonna do with that information if you don't have a gigafactory,
Yeah.
like, or whatever, how many 50,000 workers to build your shit, and a bunch of robots, and a $4 billion government subsidy? What are you gonna do with those schematics? Except be like, oh, Elon's awesome for giving us. He gave us the schematics for Tesla. If I wanted to make a Tesla, I could just go build it because I have the fucking schematics. The fuck out.
Well, it's working for the Chinese. Nero is poised to become the true competitor to Tesla.
Who's this?
Nero, Niro. It's a.
Have they written any stories about their government subsidies?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm pretty sure it's China, so there are probably government subsidies.
You go.
It's
That's what I'm. Again, it's like anybody who's gonna be competitive against Tesla is gonna have a government subsidy of some sort, and you and I are not getting government subsidies to build car companies.
Yeah.
So no matter if we have those fucking schematics or not, we can't just go out and build them. So then this gets back to the whole notion of
NIO. NIO. That's what they're called.
It's like, just because you have the schematics for a Tesla, does that mean you can build it? No. Not even remotely close.
Well, there's one guy in Massachusetts, I believe, who buys wrecked Teslas and then reassembles, but he has to buy like 4 or 5 to get one car out of it. And then it's...
How much money does he have? I mean, again...
Oh, God.
Do this. You can't just... Like, a person with no capital can't do this.
Yeah.
Like, having the schematics does not give you anything unless you have capital to go buy parts, to go buy tools, to go buy a space to build these things. And those schematics are fucking worthless. They're absolutely worthless.
Yeah, I mean, one dude out of 330 million can rebuild a Tesla.
That's proof right there. 1 out of 330 million can do it. It's so absurd. That is so absurd. And then somebody probably wrote a story about this dude as to how we know about him. Like, oh, he took the schematics and rebuilt the Tesla after he became wealthy and all this other stuff and had millions of dollars just sitting around to go buy broken down Teslas to take them apart and put them back together. Who's got the fucking time to take apart a Tesla and put it back together? A wealthy person. Yeah, that's the only person who has the time to do that shit.
You got to be fairly independently wealthy to have enough time to do that. That's a really expensive hobby. And you know, there's actually a fairly well produced documentary about him on YouTube, and he's got a parts room, like floor to ceiling shelving with spare parts, modules for the cars, because he collects that stuff. Even if he's buying one that's mostly just crapped out for like $20,000, that's $20,000. That's a whole car.
Yeah, I think you can buy a new Tesla for that now.
Well, you can buy a brand new, I think you can buy a Kia electric car for about that much.
Kia's looking dope.
Yeah, Kia's kicking some serious ass. You can buy a 2020 Kia Niro for $24,500. That's, a $25,000 electric car that can get serviced practically anywhere in the United States. Because last time I checked, or last time I drove anywhere, I saw Kia dealerships everywhere. Hyundai Kia, they've got a great network, and apparently they are able to power on the, I guess it's like the generic powering system that they've got all along highway or Interstate 70.
I saw a Kia Stinger.
Those are so pretty.
Yeah, I was like, what the fuck is this? I'm like, it's a Kia? Yeah, the Kias they're making some pretty nice sports cars now. Looking. But again, that's, there's this whole hierarchy that's been built into American culture that's supposed to make Kias undesirable because they're not super expensive. And, you know, obviously money isn't everything when it comes to a car because then you can get shit like BMW that jacks up their price and then gives you a fake ass engine sound.
So
But
BMW makes this car called the X2, and it looks an awful lot like the Toyota Venza or
all
Venza,
that shit anymore, I
Verso,
don't
no Venza.
know,
Yeah,
the same, man. They
They-
did that car model comparison
yeah,
where you all the frames and they basically all look the fucking same now.
yeah.
And no, gross. That's why I'm just over this culture where it's trying. Oh, you have a 2020, whatever. It's like, man, this shit is the same model from 2005, and y'all just put a different year on it and
Yep.
like change the curve here.
Lipstick on a pig.
100%.
And now they're putting chips in those pigs' brains. So,
Oh man.
so I want to change gears here. Recently, you have dove into Flight Simulator, and you shared a video of your flight to Chicago with me the other day, and I watched a significant portion of it because I'm very keenly interested in flight simulator, flying games in general, um, and the coolest thing that I've read about Flight Simulator 2020 is that it's tied into Bing map data. So anytime Bing Maps updates, the Flight Simulator data will update. And on top of that, it takes relevant traffic information, and populates the simulated environment with real-time traffic information. And
And
so,
the are accurate.
yeah,
It's so fucking crazy, man. The level of detail that thing has gone through. That's the only reason I even got it because I've never really been into flight simulators or any sort of simulators because the difference, let's articulate the difference between a simulator and a game is that a simulator does not have uh, points or an end in it, in that it's meant to actually duplicate whatever you're doing realistically. Like if you do a racing simulator, it's going to be like an actual racing league in real life. And it's not meant to be like an arcade game. It's meant to simulate the entire process realistically. So when it comes to the flight simulator, you have to like check in with the flight towers and let them know you're about to take off. And there's all these aspects of it that it's not a game whatsoever, down to a point where I'm looking at it like, you know, I'm not, I wasn't necessarily planning to become a pilot, but when you're putting hours into this thing, like you're basically training to become a pilot in that um, there's varying levels of accuracy to the actual controllers, but you're learning the mechanisms and what happens and the processes and the protocols, and you have to go through all that shit, or else you're just gonna crash. You're never gonna get your plane off the ground without crashing it if you don't learn how these things work in real life.
yeah,
And that's the crazy part where then you get into the whole, when you're flying over Indianapolis, or you're flying to Indianapolis from Bloomington, you're flying over 37 and seeing people stopped in real time in the like basically the traffic lights. And if it's Friday and heavy traffic, you see a bunch of traffic. It's really crazy how realistic this shit is now.
yeah. No, the moment that I enjoyed the most during your Chicago flight, uh, it's that section of 65 where you're driving through. Well, I've only driven through it. I think I've actually flown over, but I didn't see it at night. But you're driving. There's the windmill field, and it was lit up. And the ones that were, some of them were spinning, and some of them weren't spinning. That was actually the most surreal aspect of the whole experience, was seeing the windmills.
Yeah, I think I had the same experience because when you're flying, you see the red lights off in the distance, and you're like, these areas when when you've traveled them, but you never see them from this perspective. And then knowing that you're seeing that shit from above, it is super surreal. You know, it's like you feel this must be what it's like flying above fucking 65 in northern Indiana. And as you're saying, when the windmills are when they're acting as if they are in real life and you can see some of them spinning and some of them not, it's just so fucking crazy, man. It's like, yeah, I'm really keen to do more of these flights. And part of it is I didn't plan for it, but I took off at dusk, and then flying in the direction I was going, it changed from dusk to full on night, and that transition in flight was like so amazing to watch happen. Where you're like the different aspects of it, seeing the streets go from being populated to being lit up with headlights and the um street lights and the fucking building lights and all that shit, where it's meant to just mimic the real world. Like at some point I flew over what would be our neighborhood, and it's like you can see the roads from the sky where it's near our neighborhood, and I'm just like, wow, this is fucking crazy. I'm flying over my own house.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. It's one of the things that I found really amusing when I went down my flight simulator rabbit hole is there are people who are taking their simulated aircraft into the hurricanes that are beating the United States right now, just like
Yeah.
flying right into them. And I'm equally amused and intrigued because if the data is drawing from NOAA and they're getting real weather and we're getting real time traffic information, we're getting all this real time information in the simulator itself. I wonder how accurate the representation of the hurricane actually is. And I can only imagine that it's providing a real experience of flying in the most severe type of storm that we can imagine. Uh,
I'm sure it's super accurate because I don't know if you saw the landing
oh, I
when I was in
did.
Chicago. It's like I've landed before on that thing, but trying to land in O'Hare, I'm like, oh wow, I have a new respect for these dudes now. Ever flying,
Those
because
crosswinds, man.
holy shit, it was like you're bouncing the plane trying to land it in a
Yeah.
way. Now, now when I'm on the flight, I'm like, or if if people ever in America ever get their shit together and I fly again, then going into O'Hare, I'm gonna give them way more leeway.
There are some really interesting quirks about the flight simulator because it's drawing on real information. Apparently, there was a typo, and a what was supposed to be like a two-story building in Australia turned out to be a 212-story building. So there was like a giant black obelisk in Australia, and I was reading about people who had set their autopilot to guide them to this location in Australia so they could fly around it. And this is I mean, there are some aspects of this that are clearly a game to some people because one gentleman or one pilot, because I don't know the gender of this pilot, I've just made some horrible assumption there. I'm sorry about that. Anyways, one pilot managed to land their Cessna on top of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, here. So when you get into the theory of gaming, meta games exist everywhere.
Sure.
You can meta game anywhere. So there are challenges within the simulator, but I was speaking about simulators in
Oh,
general,
I know.
and
Yeah.
that's what articulates a simulator versus a game. But then again, this is where Ref Coster, in his theory of fun, has articulated that meta games will exist and can exist everywhere in any environment.
Yeah. Absolutely. I used to play Halo, the first Halo. After a buddy of mine and I beat it on Legendary and co-op, we started playing, trying to solo Legendary and getting pretty far. There's only one map that we couldn't do alone, and at a point we got so tired of it got easy on Legendary, and that's supposed to be like the most difficult setting. And so we started imposing rules like only Covenant weapons or only pistols or only melee and grenades, and that actually made it really challenging. But yeah, no, the concept of a metagame within a simulation is actually really that's true to life because in real life we don't always get to game or have fun or play, but we are able to play. And so the fact that we're able to simulate this function of existence of play within the simulator itself, I think that's fantastic. I think that brings it that much closer to the reality that it's simulating.
Yeah, and again, that's the freedom that simulators give. If it's a real simulator, yeah, you will be able to make your own metagames within it because you'll have some semblance of freedom to um, do things within that world. That's how Grand Theft Auto is such a great game because they give you mini games within the game as like you can go play darts or go do sky gliding or hang gliding or whatever, skydiving for points. But then there's also meta games that people make in their own, online, whether it's online or solo.
Yeah.
But this is also the flight simulator being an open world. Um, it's allowing people to do things like people will go fly over North Korea because you can't do that shit in real life, or you just can't fly over fucking the Gaza Strip. Like you can't. There's things that people are now able to do in the simulator to see the real world in ways that you can never actually do in real life. Um, that are like somewhat accurate to the real world experience. Then, and that's kind of where, you know, I do feel as if this flight simulator is going to replace some of the best parts of travel without the worst parts. Um, especially when you have to, if you don't necessarily have to do it this way because there's ways that the simulator gives you options to move around so you don't have to take off and land between each place. Or there's like tours where you fly around monuments and it'll just take you to the next monument. Like if you go from Big Ben to Chichen Itza, you don't have to fly all the way between them. It just gives you the chance to fly around them. So there's things in it that then give a person the capacity to see landmarks and cities from a perspective that you'd actually have to take a flight to do in the first place.
Yeah.
Which is not cheap. Like,
So I was looking at a variety of control interfaces for flying games, for Flight Simulator, and there's the classic hands-on throttle and stick configuration. But then there's also a yoke and lever, or uh, a console, a secondary console to control your speed and flaps and things like that. And they're all configurable, of course. And these things range in price from like, you know, $70 all the way up to hundreds of thousands of dollars for a full-blown Boeing 777 flight simulator. Uh, and they can be as complex or as simple as a single monitor or a bank of monitors and switches and dials, all the way up to the actual cockpit of an aircraft loaded with hardware that allow you to control the actual functions of the plane in the simulator. And that's a crazy, crazy expensive environment to play in. I guess the corollary would be a full VR setup where you have an omnidirectional treadmill and a suit that's suspended so that you can, a haptic suit that's suspended so you can feel when you're touched. But these are incredibly detailed simulator cockpits. Like scary detailed, in fact. Like I look at some of them and it's like, man, I have no idea what 99% of that stuff does. But I think that's the cool part about the simulator environment is that it gives you an opportunity to learn, like you were saying.
and not crash in real life.
I mean, you might get so into it that you like fall out of your chair and hurt yourself, but
Yeah. I definitely almost spilled the drink. Definitely did not almost die. Well, and then, you see the first few times I was trying to take off, it's like you can get the plane off the ground, but if you don't know what the flaps are doing, you might crash that shit immediately.
Yeah.
You're like, oh shit, I crashed the plane at the airport because I got off the ground just enough to make it in a dangerous position.
Going fast enough. Yeah. When I was 6 or 7, I had my first computer. It was a Macintosh, just a Macintosh, and it had Paint. And then I got a 128, and it had Load Runner, and then a 512. And I'm talking about megabytes of RAM, 512 megabytes of RAM. That's so tiny, but it was enough to run the operating system and Flight Simulator. Like the very first, it was all wireframes and weird, like 8-bit texture, and it was in monochrome. And I remember I crashed that plane more times than I got it off the ground. But I remember the first time I actually got it off the ground and stayed in the air for some period of time, it was exhilarating. And it felt like being free because I could fly this thing finally. And then it came time to land because I ran out of fuel and then it crashed. But I walked away.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, I get that, man, and that's why I think when people don't have never necessarily even tried a simulator, they don't understand what it's like to fail for fun, because there's no actual life-threatening life or threat to your life. It's okay to crash a plane like 30 times. And it's actually fun seeing all the different ways you can crash it. And then when you finally get off the ground, you feel a level of accomplishment because that simulator made it so that, yeah, you'd have to do it correctly to not just crash your shit the first 30 times. And then you feel like you learned something.
yeah. Yeah.
Because, now that I've done this simulator for 5 hours, every time I see a movie or a TV show that tries to bullshit trope, talk somebody down in a cockpit, that's some bullshit. Like, there's no way, there's no fucking way that shit's happening in real life. I mean, obviously,
Look at the bank of switches in front of you. Okay, there's a group of red ones. Don't touch those. But immediately to the right and down 3, there's a switch you need to turn on, and that's the lights in the cabin so you can see the other switches. That's how I imagine that shit would actually go down. And oh god, which one is it? Don't touch the red switches. Repeat.
Man, how irresponsible was it for Hollywood to even create that stupid ass trope in the first place? And it must have been created by somebody who's never set foot in the cockpit of a plane to think they could just waltz in there. Oh yeah, I'll take the fucking helm. Give me the headphones. What do I need to do? Shit. If you think you can do that, and that's what movies and TV were telling us for I mean, pretty much still are as far as I can tell. But goddamn, that's a way, way off. There's no way that shit's happening in real life. And I'm like, of course, of all the things to get, I'm not getting hung up on it. It's just a matter of the fact that it existed in movies as a trope. And the movie didn't just stop there and they turn to the camera and say, we're sorry that we have to use this dumbass trope to keep the story moving along. But we just couldn't figure out how to move forward. So we apologize. Here you go, back to the story. The fact that didn't happen every time somebody didn't come in and have to take over a fucking flight. The craziest shit is like Airplane now apparently has the most accurate one because only an actual pilot would be able to do that.
Well, apparently it's happened one time with Helios Airways Flight 522 in 2005. Both pilots were incapacitated because there was a cabin pressurization switch that was set to manual instead of automatics, and the pilots just, between their 20,000 hours of flight experience, didn't realize it and then they passed out when they got up into their flight altitude, and apparently one person has done this, but they didn't actually land successfully. They crashed, and all 121 people aboard were killed. I mean, it sucks because we shouldn't be laughing about a bunch of people dying, but it's a trope for a reason.
I'm definitely not laughing at them dying. Like, that's not what I'm laughing at. It's the fact that, the whole reason they thought they could do that is because we've been that shit.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that they tried and didn't work tirelessly to just try to wake the guys up or whatever, the pilots, of whether they were male or female.
So
yeah, I'm gonna do it. Incapacitated. I'm gonna.
The one time a person has taken over the controls from the pilot who died, it was let's see, when was this? Like 2000. Oh, that's not the right date. Anyways, it was a Cessna 172. The guy was with his wife and child, his two daughters, and he did actually have a private pilot's license, but he hadn't been up, flying for a while apparently, and so he managed to, land the plane, but that's not, he was a pilot.
Yep, and that's exactly what I'm saying. Where apparently, Airplane has the most accurate version of that trope now.
Yeah.
Only an actual pilot would be the person that could come in and do that.
And Airplane's a farce.
Right. It's a fucking satirical film in the first place, and they're the only ones that got it, one of the few that got it remotely right.
Yeah, Andy had a drinking problem.
Right, yeah. So that was probably accurate too. I remember I was on a plane one time, and there was two flight attendants arguing about whether they should give the captain any more alcohol. And one of them glanced over at me and was like, I don't know if this person should have heard it. And they started walking away, and that's when I was like, were they fucking with me, or was this real? Did I just witness this? Because it was like a international flight overseas where nobody's be able to do anything about the fucking drunk ass pilot at that point. Our pilot was getting drunk if the fucking people served him, and it was up to them.
Yeah. There are examples of people landing small planes, but definitely not passenger jets, not commercial airlines or airplanes. There's one guy, George Anhalt, who landed a small Piper Cherokee 6. It's a 6-seat plane, had his wife and 3 sons with him. And the pilot had the autopilot on, but he died 10 minutes before they were supposed to land. And let's see, does it say that he was a pilot or not? No, apparently he had 0 flight experience, but the radio with the tower had already been established.
So wait, are you saying that the plane landed itself because it was on autopilot and with the dead body?
No, they talked him in.
Oh.
But he was in a small Piper Cherokee. That's a very tiny plane. 6-passenger plane. It's about the size of it's like 2 cars long, maybe 3 cars long. Not a big plane at all. Single engine, cramped cockpit. So people have landed small planes where if they were going slow enough, they might have survived anyways. But it looks like the general trend is people who don't know how to fly planes crash them. They might be able to get it to the ground, just as a matter of how safely do they get it to the ground.
They're too fast. They
Too
got to the
fast.
ground too fast. They did that too quick.
Adjust your trim. Lower your flaps. Slow down. Oh God. Kaboom.
What are these words meaning?
What did you just say to me? Yeah. So, I've got a slideshow of various commercial jet simulators and personal simulators, and I think there's one military drone control system in the slideshow. But all of these have more switches than, even the most simple, easy to look at simulator has more buttons and switches than I could just look at and know what it does. And what little knowledge I have of airplanes, it doesn't help. I mean, sure, I think if the thing was in the air and it was high enough in the air, I might be able to figure out how to keep it going in a straight line, or maybe raise or lower the altitude or change directions and not die doing that. But I think as soon as you get close to the ground, everything changes because ground temperature changes the way air circulates. Um, like you said, the regional crosswinds of O'Hare were something that you were unfamiliar with. There's just a lot of factors that we as passengers or the non-pilot class, we don't have access to that information in a meaningful way. Like I could look it up, but until you're in the simulator or in the plane itself and can see it, it's all just theory.
Yeah, because then you see those videos of like the passenger jets doing the near vertical takeoffs, and it's like, okay, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Actually try to fly a plane in the simulator and realize any plane for that matter, if you point it, if you bank it too high, that shit's gonna stall out. And it's just one of those things where you don't even think about it because most people are used to cars and how cars operate, assuming that planes are just driving like cars. I know a lot of people don't necessarily think about it, but they're not thinking about it. And then because the pilots are so good, they're probably just formulating these things in their head as if they're happening, as if in the same way a car does it,
Yeah.
just in the air. And that's where
those two pilots in that first anecdote, 20,000 combined hours of flight experience. 20,000 hours. Like, whoa. Whoa. I wonder what the average flight time is. Let's see. 3 to 6 hours is a medium haul. A short haul is under 3. A long haul is 6 to 12. So let's say, what's between 3 and 6? 4.5. So what's 4.5 into 10,000? That's 2,222 flights at 4.5 hours per flight.
Yeah.
And if they're flying 3 flights a day, that's 2 years of flying if they're doing 3 flights a day. But that's a lot. That's like, what is that? That's 13.5 hours. That's impossible. They're doing 2 flights a day, so that's going to take them a little bit longer.
Well, and you got to assume every destination, well, not everyone, but a lot of the destinations have return trips. So it's like every flight almost has 2 flights in one, unless it's just a, trip around to get hours where you're flying.
Yeah. So even then, that's 3 years of 2 4.5 hour flights a day per pilot. 3 years.
Good.
That's
You want fucking pilot to have that much experience,
Yeah, but still, guys who've been flying for a while professionally, like even they make mistakes. So.
Oh, yeah.
Man.
But that's why, again, it's like, that's the difference between the Sully Sullenberger, who's like the man with 40,000 hours or whatever. I don't know how many hours he had, but
Chelsea.
Surely that it would. That's why he was able to do what he did. That's probably the difference between 20,000 and 40,000 hours.
Yeah. So, even then, that's 3 hours, 3 years of 2 flight 2 4.5 hour flights a day per pilot. 3 years. That's 2,222 flights. 2,222 flights a day. So that's 3 years. That's
And I feel like there's people who could probably do things with a passenger jet that other people would say was not possible with the passenger jet
Yeah.
because they have so many hours in it.
He had more than 20,000 hours just for himself by the time that happened in 2009, and that's over a decade ago.
Oh, do they just once they hit 20,000, they stop counting?
I'm sure they don't, but I'm having problems finding an actual number other than over
Right.
20,000.
So there's gonna be documented. Every hour is gonna be documented, basically. And that's some shit you learn.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, he landed in a river. God.
Yeah. He landed a plane with a at least one disabled engine in a river.
Yeah, hit a goose.
Yeah. And that's why Tom Hanks played him.
Oh man.
You fucking have a bird strike and you save everybody when that shit could have ended way differently. Tom Hanks is gonna play you.
Yep. I feel like, if Tom Hanks is the guy that portrays you in a movie, and it's like based in reality somehow, there has to be something good about that.
Right, you had to like land on the moon or some shit. Or
Yeah.
bunch of people.
Survive on a deserted island,
Exactly, yeah. For you.
and deliver the package at the end of the movie. Because he delivered that the joke is that that package contained a satellite phone. In the movie, I think it was like a pair of wings, I can't even remember what it was. But there's a good joke about it, how he goes and delivers it, and it turns out to be a sat phone. And the woman who accepts the package is like, "Oh, I've been waiting for this." The thing that strikes me the most, though, about these simulator environments, these cockpits for these flight simulators, it's not just the detail. Um, some of them are for sale. You can buy one for $60,000, $30,000, $100,000 more. A lot of airlines actually provide means for individuals to you know spend time in the flight simulator. They're expensive as can be, but it is possible to gain access to that environment. I mean, that's just like an extremely expensive arcade experience at that point. Um, and it makes me really appreciate the kind of arcades that I had when I was younger, where you go and just, I guess, pumping quarters into machines isn't actually that doesn't sound that badass to me now, but it actually kind of does, because I remember the first time I saw like a Mech Warrior arcade where it was a bunch of pods, and you got in and you got to control a mech. Or the first time I saw a really well done car simulator, driving simulator, where you're on a gimbal and the it moves around, even up to the point that like the open wheeled F1 style simulators were essentially on the end of a long rod that would move back and forth to simulate drifting. Well, to a lesser extent, because those cars don't really drift, but uh, we've come a long way from the coin op, 1 to 3 buttons, 6 buttons, maybe if it's Street Fighter, and a joystick, to arcades that have really well realized control interfaces for cars, for flight, for I guess the classic is the shoot 'em up, the what do they call it? When it's on a car and it rolls around like it's a track, yeah, a track shooter, where you're you're in a like a Area 51 where you were moved from point to point after clearing an area. Those things have been around for a while, but I'm pretty sure there's a game called Deer Hunter where it's all about being quiet and collected and taking your sweet time to shoot at a deer in a video game. And there are fishing simulators, and I'm not even talking about virtual reality yet. But the arcade is something that I actually kind of miss. That's one of the few things that I missed because that was a place where you could go and play games that were just unavailable. Not every arcade game made it to the console.
Yeah, because there was a period where consoles weren't powerful enough to run some of the arcade games.
Yeah.
I think that's where we were at like 8-bit and 16-bit at home on the consoles, but the arcade games were slightly more powerful. But that's also why they were thousands of dollars per machine.
Yeah.
Because then you think about it, it was like all those machines were dedicated computers just to run one game, and it's like that game was so memory intensive and labor or resource intensive that it was multiple $1,000 machine just to run that game at the time. It's a weird time for game creation and for computing for those reasons. But then as consoles got more powerful and had access to more games and less exclusive titles went to arcade for various reasons, then the consoles started to sort of disrupt the gaming or the arcade industry. But what I was reading about, it's like if you actually look at the arcade culture in America, a lot of it was never necessarily all about the games, and a lot of it was about getting away from parents. So that's when adults started having consoles. It wasn't because they had the consoles necessarily that they didn't go to arcades. It was because they didn't have to get away from their parents anymore, because then you realize things like Dave and Buster's existed for a while. I mean, obviously COVID hit, but those types of overlapping arcade/bars existed in America, whereas in Japan, full-on arcades still existed that were just pure arcades and not necessarily the Dave and Buster type. So while arcades went away in America because Americans were using them as a reprieve from their parents, they never actually went away in Japan in a way that then makes you look at the gaming cultures to then say, oh, there's these things, there's all these cultural aspects about gaming that are then creating a resurging arcade scenario in America for different, like for nostalgic reasons. This is obviously, again, pre-COVID, but then it becomes this weird, because it's nostalgia, that's why you have to have like alcohol and adult stuff tied to it, because it's actually meant for adults and not just, it's like arcades are age agnostic, really, in most cases, where you have some games for adults and some games for kids. But a lot of times, like, Chuck E. Cheese wasn't serving alcohol when it was Showbiz Pizza. I think only after years and years and years did they ever finally start serving alcohol, because their original audience got a lot older. So there's multiple generations, and they finally had to adjust their business model. So there's all these things about arcades in America that then you can't even 100% blame the consoles on their demise, because the same shit didn't happen in Japan.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. The thing that we
Because
lost.
then it's
Okay.
I was just gonna say, it's like, I remember my first experience of VR in an arcade, and it was horrible. So then it turned me off to VR because I think I had to pay like $4 or $5 for a terrible gaming experience because it was so prohibitively expensive that the arcades that were able to afford them then had to turn around and charge their customers an insane amount for like a very short amount of time. So that's when now, like when I'm thinking about starting an arcade, it's like you have to take into account what what does a person not have access to, and then can you give the person access to that at a non-prohibitively expensive cost. And that's where these things like flight simulators, driving simulators that give you the full-on, um, not even necessarily the full-on environment, but more than something someone could afford at home, become the only real points of creating arcades. Like everybody can't afford a VR headset, but a lot of people can afford, you know, $5 for half an hour, $10 for an hour, or whatever, just to try it out, or whatever the cost ends up being, in the sense of purchasing an entire headset and gaming computer, or whatever combination to do VR is a lot more expensive than just going to a VR arcade that you can then just rent the thing for like a brief period. So that's kind of where, you know, there is room for arcades in modern times because there are still gaming technologies that are prohibitively expensive for the average person to like get access to and have in their home. So that's kind of where, you know, I think that is something where we've been thinking about it. But again, there's all these aspects of like why it didn't work in America in the first place, because then there needs to also be, I think, a historical element to it where arcades are this they're like a capsule. And when you have an arcade, it's meant to be a functional capsule, but it's also encapsulating the whatever the gaming of the time is, the aesthetic of the time, the um, you know, and even down to the functional space, where now arcades are going to have to be more spread out. You know, the games are lined up next to each other.
Yeah.
An arcade now is going to have to be way more spread out if they're actually going to exist. And that's like, there's all these things about the evolution of arcades, to then, you know, the pinball arcade originally.
The ticket arcade.
Yeah. I mean, and I was even thinking about, apparently Tetris was, you know, originally an arcade game, in that I can't imagine going to an arcade to play Tetris now, but I'm sure there's still people who do. And that's where, but the only reason I can't imagine is because I can play it at home. But there's all these aspects of, you know, an arcade is like a pond compared to the ocean of the internet. So if you want to go be a big fish in a small pond, you can do that in an arcade and then get this feeling of like, oh, I just went and beat everybody in this local arcade, without then having to turn around and prove yourself on a world stage, knowing whoever you are, there's always going to be somebody better in a world of almost 8 billion people. Like, no matter what game you play, no matter what position you are, there's always going to be somebody better.
Yeah, well, that's where like pro sports happens. Um, that's where things like Capcom does Pro Tour, and so there's a Street Fighter League. I bet those guys, those gamers, are incredible at Street Fighter if they're getting to that level. But there's got to be a way to feed that. There's got to be some kind of online interaction where people create accounts and interact with other gamers, and their profile develops, their record develops, and then maybe they apply to compete in small local to regional tournaments that are sanctioned somehow. Like an arcade would have to. I'm sure an arcade has to fill it out. I'm trying to find out how you get into this, but there's got to be a way to do it.
Oh yeah, they do guilds and
Okay.
leagues online. So it's like, for example, Injustice, the fighting game, you have guilds that you can join where there's challenges every week, and um, if your character's only a certain level, certain guilds might reject you because they're trying to compete in the higher challenges, and then you're just not qualified, or like you're not going to be able to do the more complex challenges. So that's where on the global level, it's like, just because the way the challenges are presented, if you're a novice, there's just no way you can compete because of the energy levels and all these other things that
Yeah.
make it gradiated, so that there is also a reward for putting more time into it.
Yeah.
So that's also, I think, an important aspect of it, to make it worthwhile for the people getting involved and putting a shitload of time in, to say, oh, if I put in 1,000 hours, that better results in something that a person can't walk in with 10 hours and then just be on my same level. And also why they're not going to be able to join the same guild as somebody like, the level 50 people aren't going to get somebody that's like a level 2 in their guild. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But that's not true of every gaming environment. But that's also how, again, they are able to leverage that whole smaller pond feel online.
Yeah. I feel like an arcade would be a good place for a tournament. That seems like the best place for a tournament.
Yeah, somebody's pointing out like Rocket League final, or it was Tim Lukasik. But I think it's like League of Legends. There's a ton of gaming tournaments that regularly draw more crowds than, or bigger crowds than, a lot of actual like physical sporting events that have been going on for a while. Like I think it's StarCraft.
Yeah.
StarCraft tournaments, they draw like tens and tens of thousands of people. I think some upwards of 60, 80,000 people. And then people are tuning in from around the world even. And that's how these gamers get paid so much, because there's actually a shitload of people. It's like the tournaments will rent out. I mean, obviously pre-COVID, they would rent out stadiums for weekends, and have these basically gaming nerds taking over the sports stadiums, and it's the craziest shit. Where I think now we're at a point where esports is about to be just as valid as physical sports, just because of the way that the pandemic has made everything, it's almost impossible to bring back crowds in America. They're bringing them back other places, but now America's going more and more virtual because dumb people can't get their shit together. So that's where I'm like, I'm ready to go. If video games and esports become more valid in the West as valid as they were in other countries, that's where I'm like, I'm already there.
Yeah, man. It looks like there's some licensing. You gotta get an esports license for certain leagues. I'm assuming that's just like analogous to a membership fee.
Apparently, 100 million people watch the League of Legends World Championship, making it the most popular esport.
100 million people watch League of Legends.
People.
100 million.
And then a lot of Americans don't even know what the fuck that is.
Oh my god, 100 million people watch it.
1/3 of America, the equivalent, watch that sport, and then a lot of Americans don't even know what the fuck that shit is.
Wow.
it's how much of a niche like Americans have become in our culture, in that we are so not exposed to worldly stuff. Like this shit exists in such a big way. This is like the equivalent of the Super Bowl on a global level, but America doesn't even know this shit exists. I mean, I know it exists because of another American. So not to say that some Americans aren't onto it, but there's so many people that don't know this thing even exists, that would then turn, what the fuck's League of Legends? This is some bunch of little nerds. Like, no, this is a sport that is bigger than American, like a lot of American shit at this point.
See, I'm trying to see how many people tune into Monday Night Football. The average is 12.6 million viewers.
99.9 million viewers for the Super Bowl this year. So League of Legends.
Oh yeah, Super Bowl. Sorry.
Has more viewers than the fucking Super Bowl. It's bigger than the goddamn Super Bowl by 100,000 viewers. Officially, no longer, like, the Super Bowl is now the League of Legends of football, because the League of Legends tournament is bigger. So you can't be like, it's the Super Bowl. No, the Super Bowl is like League of Legends now. that shit is
Super Bowl peak viewership was in 2015 with 114 million people.
Yeah, so League of Legends officially bigger than the Super Bowl. Officially. Fucking insane. And that's why, that's why I started talking about it before I looked up the numbers, because I'm like, this is some big shit that America don't even know about.
Oh, yeah.
That's bigger than the fucking Super Bowl. And people are like, esports, what are these fucking video gamers? Yeah, guess what? That shit is bigger than football. Bigger than American football, y'all. And we're at that time. And I'm like, so, I can't stress enough how good it is to be alive at a time when video games are usurping fucking brain-killing sports. A little brain-destroying sport is being usurped by video games, and I cannot be happier.
Well, we know that utilizing video games helps people with their timing and coordination and dexterity. And you got to read to play most video games. There are very few games that don't have any kind of text at all. I think Dead Space is like the only one that I can think of that doesn't have any text at all. No, it has text every so often. You have to approach a console or a door, but otherwise there's no HUD or anything like that. But I can't even think of a game that doesn't have words in it.
Is such a thing even possible? Like, yeah. And this is one of those beauties of gaming where, yeah, because games are effectively interactive literature, because you have to write them. You can't just cobble together a game without writing it. That's not how games work.
Coding without code. It's like Zen coding.
It's basically a choose your own adventure book in the form of digital images and interactive button presses. Yeah. And that's because whenever you have any form of story, it's going to have to be written by someone. And that's where, it's really, really crazy to see the elite hierarchies that are established on different forms of media to be like, oh, the book is the most elite form of ingesting information, when it's just different. A book is obviously the best way to ingest a mystery. It's really difficult to do mystery on film or television. Some people can pull it off. They can pull off detective shit. Monk was really good at detective stories that gave you enough information as a viewer that allowed you to actually solve the mystery by the time the story was over. That, to me, defines a mystery, because a lot of times TV shows will say, "Oh, this is a detective story or this is a mystery," and you don't actually have the capacity to solve the mystery as a viewer, and it's only the detective in the story that's given the information. That's not a mystery to me, and that's where it's a detective tale, but it's not an actual mystery in that when a viewer is not given the chance to solve the crime or solve the mystery along with the protagonist, then there is a lie that is being created to give the semblance of a mystery, but you never actually had the chance to solve it. And that's a fucking lie to me. That's deception in the worst kind. That said, when I referred to Monk being able to pull it off, the whole reason I allude to it is because they actually do it really, really well. So by the time you get to the later seasons, if you figured out the mechanisms that they give you to figure out the crime, you can get better at solving the crime because you know what to start looking for because it's not something that is out of your hands. And that's where it's like with Murder She Wrote, you know, a lot of times it's out of your hands because they're not actually giving you the background information you need to know, and only Jessica is privy to the information that's going to solve the crime,
You
and
know,
it's frustrating.
I'm actually convinced that she was the murderer the entire time.
Dexter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Murder She Wrote, she, how could she write all those stories about one town, and how could all that shit happen in one small ass town?
So the whole reason it gives off that vibe is because they never give you the actual information that you need to solve the crime. So there is always missing information that allows that narrative to be constructed. There is a narrative in which Jessica is the killer because we are always missing information, and magically she's always the ones that finds it. And the viewer has not been shown something that Jessica comes up with. So in fact, that could be perceived as her planting the information and planting the evidence because the viewer is not shown it before Jessica provides it. That is not, it's either poor writing or we have to look at the possibility that Jessica is the killer because of the way it's constructed. So that's a valid view. Like that's something that's legitimately valid in assessing Murder She Wrote that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge. But somebody who's watched almost all the episodes, I think it's hilarious that it's there, but you have to acknowledge that it's there because of their poor writing and poor mechanisms in constructing a weekly mystery that then you can't actually solve until you've watched it. And that's, again, it's like one of these things where the reason that people say books are better are for things like mysteries where you can establish very rich scenes and rich worlds to then have an actual mystery unfold that you are then given the information within, but there's so much information that then it's an actual mystery. But again, a half an hour TV show or hour TV show is limited in how much they can actually explore that concept.
Yeah.
Because even then, you know, I don't think, like when we're looking at Magnum PI, there's no semblance of the audience ever really trying to solve a mystery, even though it's a detective show. Like, I don't want to say 70 to 80% of the Magnum PI episodes are meant to be some form of action for the viewer, even though we're actually following a private, like we're following a detective.
Yeah.
But we don't actually get to do any detecting. And this is, again, you know, when people talk about Batman and the greatest detective of all time, when they're talking about the Matt Reeves spin that we haven't received yet, we haven't really had the chance as an audience to do any detective work with Batman unless you're reading the comics. In very few cases, I think Batman Hush storyline, which is like a cartoon, and I haven't watched Gotham by Gaslight, but I think that's also a detective one. But Yeah, uh, that whole aspect of the characters almost completely lost um, if you're only consuming the animated or live action form of this character. Even though it's just, it's really integral to the original character, they just can't. You can't really create a mystery. It's really difficult to do um, live action or animated in the same way that it is to do with the book. But that's again why pointing at Monk is so
Such a good
important
example.
in that. Yeah, like you can't. It can be done. It's not impossible.
Yeah, I think we're going to start seeing the integration of well, technology that people recognize. Because I feel like in anime, it's easier for the story to be told and leave all sorts of clues that the audience will miss, that the characters may not actively interact with, or they might actively interact with them. But we're gonna start. I feel like we're gonna start seeing more, smart devices and people tracking phones. I guess that's starting to border on a brave new world at that point. But
Well, and that's how Lucifer is actually really smart about creating their mysteries,
hmm
because it does take those things into account. Where it's like, yeah, in a world where cell phones and smartphones are everywhere, how do you actually create a mystery when everything is tracked?
yeah,
Um, so that is, obviously it's a borderline supernatural, well, not borderline, it is a supernatural show, but it is a detective show that intelligently addresses these things.
yeah, I've
uh,
I've been powering through the early seasons of Lucifer again because I noticed that there are some new episodes, and I realized that I forgot what was going on. And so rather than just try and watch a few episodes of season 4 to get caught up, I've decided I'm going to watch the whole thing again because it won't take that long. I forgot how good that show is.
yeah, it's really good, and in that, they, it's just a good philosophical exploration
It's like
of.
the dark side of the good place almost.
Yeah, 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 for sure. I think that's a very good way to put it, um, because it is definitely, well, they have the um, psychologist as, or the therapist as the philosophical butler scenes,
Yeah,
where these obvious dialogues about these ethical dilemmas are then represented through Lucifer talking to his therapist in a very Paradise Lost reference, and also, the way that we are is not meant to make you empathize with Lucifer. It's meant to make you look at the character honestly and look at what he's doing honestly, and from his therapist's perspective, then look at his perspective to see why he would do these things. And in that, the what they explore then makes someone who has been familiarized with a wrong interpretation of these characters start to re-examine um, philosophical frameworks and how these things have been presented to them. Which is also why when you get that scene of Lucifer scolding the Satanists, it becomes hilarious meta narrative of what the producers are doing with the source material, while also addressing the real world bastardization of of this lore.
yeah.
I can never find, like, it's like nobody appreciated that speech as much as I did, and nobody has like cut that shit out. Or I couldn't. It's not that easy to find. As much as that scene is, um, you know, a hilariously ironic uh, refraction of tropes, it's like nobody cared about it. I don't know if it offended too many people or wasn't or like not enough people got it or what, but I was amazed that nobody was writing like academic articles about that scene of Lucifer scolding Satanists on a show about Lucifer uh, abandoning his reign over hell. And in the process, examining why he was reigning over hell in the first place.
Yeah. No, I really enjoy this show again. I'd completely forgotten what was going on. So now, the second time through, I'm noticing all these little subtleties about the way the characters interact. They do a really good job of hinting at where the story goes.
Well,
They,
what I
they leave enough information hidden behind tinted windows and flashing strobes on cameras. I mean, sometimes it's disorienting, but they do a really good job with the sensory overload in the production of that show. I mean, nothing that makes me like dizzy or anything like that, but it's sufficient to make me like the dynamic between just a regular scene and when they bombard you with a flashing light to emphasize what's happening. It's it's very well done.
well, they definitely are meaning to evoke hedonistic responses in the viewer actively, and they're not shy about this. And in the process, I think what they're also trying to do is establish this world that is connected to ours through the screen, and they know it's connected to our world through the screen, but the characters are not aware of it. Because at one point, I think it's either I think it's season 4, um, Neil Gaiman as God starts talking to the audience, and it's directly addressing the audience. So they break the fourth wall in the show, which they do in the comic books as well. So there is this element of, on the one hand, we are supposed to be viewing a fantastic realm that is not real, but on the other hand, these people exist in a world that is connected to ours in a way that the show cleverly acknowledges, also referencing the source material. Because I'm not sure if you've read the comic books, but it's different enough that it makes it worth watching for anybody who likes the comics, but it's similar enough that you see what they're trying to do in taking this lore and this character and placing him in modern times. Like the idea of Lucifer abandoning his reign in hell to then go live on Earth with humans in 20 whatever, whenever they started filming it. It creates this story that then makes one examine not only the modern times that are being used as a setting, but also this lore being carried forward into relevance. Because Lucifer 2,000 years ago is not relevant to somebody in 2020. What Lucifer would do if he was in LA in 2020 or whenever this shit was filmed is much more relevant to us, and that's why this tale is more obviously it's more interesting, but it's more something that then resonates with people rather than just examining like, oh, the same old Dante's Inferno or Paradise Lost for that matter. Like, we don't need another Paradise Lost interpretation.
Yeah. I feel like we're due for a reinterpretation of Pygmalion, though. That seems to happen every few years.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like definitely one of those that keeps getting falling back on.
I feel like that's a. I think it's like a. Let's see what's the describe it. It's not just a classic story, but it's something that's easy
And
to reboot every few years.
yeah, I'm trying to think of the um yeah, Weird Science is definitely one.
Yeah. Um, Pretty Woman, obviously. Uh, Can't Buy Me Love. I think I feel like should be in that list too.
But yeah, that trope is definitely what Mighty Aphrodite, Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen.
There's probably there's got to be a big list of these.
But yeah, that's that's this whole element of when shit gets redone and reinterpreted, it's meant to make the original story relevant and keep it relevant after the original has fallen out of relevance.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of why there's this element of if we have the actual Lucifer story now, it needs to be set in modern times for it to be relevant. Otherwise, nobody really cares about it.
Yeah, nobody's gonna be able to understand some Cockney British lady, and if they did a shot for shot remake of My Fair Lady.
Exactly, and that's why period pieces really. Um, I feel like a lot of times they're just an excuse to not have black actors, uh, because it's like the period pieces aren't really relevant. Like Downton Abbey is only relevant to people who crave Victorian caste systems again. Like, fuck, I need to watch Downton Abbey for. This shit ain't relevant to me. Some old ass bullshit. Like, if I want drama, I'll go watch a Marvel movie. I'll go watch one of the Avengers movie because that's drama in modern times. Their superhero movies are drama. They just happen to have action. And it's like I don't need a movie that's all drama and no action and then further place that shit in the past 300 years ago in a time that is completely disconnected. Fuck that shit. I don't need that shit.
Superhero movies are the modern Hong Kong kung fu film. They've got everything. They've got comedy. They've got romance. They've got drama. They've got thrilling moments. They've got terrifying moments. They're larger than life, but then they also get microscopic in the story, really like truly granular. In the case of Ant Man,
Yeah.
but they run the full spectrum. And that was the hallmark of the Hong Kong action film.
Yeah, and again, that's like not to. It's not like obviously people have their own preferences, and it's not to say people can't have their own um, likes and shit like that. Obviously, it's just more so when we're looking at like you keep getting these period pieces over and over and over. Um, they're just so devoid of black. Well, okay, I guess Hamilton is technically a period piece. But the whole reason it's a thing is because then it's like, what if we did a period piece with brown people? And that's the only reason it's popular is because they're like, oh, a period piece that's not all white people. We switched the white people out with black people for once, and we know it.
Wait, so they get an award for that though, right?
Exactly. It's like the whole let's be edgy. Let's make a superhero a woman. Dun, dun, dun. It's the same shit because they went for so long with these bullshit ass lack of representations that now they get awards for Captain Marvel and get awards for Hamilton because they didn't include women in superhero stories. They didn't include brown and black people in period pieces before. So now they're like, oh shit, we got this whole new thing we can do, and then milk that for another 10 or 20 years. And make it seem like we're being progressive all of a sudden.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, eventually we'll have to have a black female superhero. I'm pretty sure that Marvel already has one lined up.
Yeah, Monica Rambeau.
Yeah. Eventually we'll have to have some Asian superheroes.
And at least Simu Liu is set up to play Chang-Chi here. So that's in the work. I mean, his shit's being filmed, like, as we're all, I don't think it's done yet, but.
Well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, Shang-Chi's about to be pretty much an all-Asian cast. And then
That's even cooler.
just got cast in something. I think she's about to play a superhero, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, good. We'll get full representation soon, and then it'll actually be about stories.
Yeah, she's cast. Oh, it's not superheroes. Raya and the Last Dragon, but it's like she's definitely like a powerful character in this. A dragon in human form. Oh, wait, no, hold on. It's a fantasy film.
Oh, it's a Disney movie. Ah,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, they were like, "Fuck these racist ass Star Wars people. We're giving Kelly Tran her own movie now."
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And she gets to be
Bitches.
a Disney character. That's even cooler.
Yeah, it's like I can't. I was so mad when, like, the response was to cut down her fucking screen time. Like, fuck you guys, give her her own goddamn movie now. They're still doing it. Look, even though it's not live action yet, they'll get there. She'll make a shitload of money because this is for kids. So, and especially a bunch of the Chinese kids gonna be watching this shit too. She'll make her money and be laughing at the racists all the way to the bank.
Yeah. That's you know, we're at a really weird place where it seems a lot of attention isn't good attention, but it doesn't even matter because half of the audience is going to see the bad attention and they're going to be, you know, more interested in understanding what's going on. And then when there's good attention, people that don't like it are going to be that much more interested in speaking out. And so no matter what, it like doubles the amount of chatter surrounding a story or a character or an actor or an actress. It's really surreal. And of course it's always like the worst parts of humanity seem to come out when this stuff happens.
Right. Yeah, it's never, never any rational human being.
God, there are people who are trying to rationalize the behavior of that 17-year-old who went to Wisconsin to shoot people. And then somehow I got a recommendation from Google from The Blaze, and they were talking about how Jacob Blake has, all these problems. Like he apparently was charged with sexual assault back earlier this year, like in May, and the police were very concerned about the knife that he was in his possession. And apparently he had been tasered and wrestled to the ground but broke free, stuff like that. And I remember watching a video and I didn't see any of that stuff. Like actually, I mean, I watched him go to his car. They weren't trying to wrestle him. He didn't look like a man who'd just been tased.
No, not at all.
So, that's the active revision of history. They're not even waiting a month for it. They're getting right into it. We've got to lay the bricks so that the foundation is strong enough to support their version of reality with those alternate facts. Oh, this is even more off topic. Apparently, some internet sleuths have traced DNS activity of QAnon back to the same physical server that 8chan is located on.
Yeah, there's a very strong possibility that QAnon's been coming out of Russia.
Yeah, that it's being hosted on and run by the guy that owns the 8chan servers, the physical servers. Like that, there might be a strong link between QAnon and 8chan now, or a Q in 8chan, which is even weirder. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, QAnon lost its online home when 8chan was shut down. Oh, no longer available. Fucking QAnon. The thing about that stuff that's so bizarre to me is that there seem to be quite a few, aside from the kind of conspiratorial thinking, it seems like there's quite a few people that are reasonably intelligent that are just jumping in on this stuff. And then you read about it, and it's like, wait, these are like 19th century conspiracies. How the hell did these resurface?
Yeah, it's really crazy how dumb Americans are now, right? Like, the intelligence level of Americans is, I want to say, at an all-time low, but they've been pretty dumb in the past too, so it's hard to say.
Well, it's been going on for years, but IQ rates in a lot of developing countries have been dropping. And the United States is one of those countries where the average IQ is declined. Unfortunately, I don't think people are as concerned about that as they should be.
Yeah, they're more concerned with whether Bill Gates is trying to microchip them or not. And it's like, we just found out that Elon Musk is barely able to put a microchip in a pig. They're worried about Bill Gates microchipping them.
Well, Bill Gates is really well organized. I mean, really well organized. But I still don't think that he's got. I mean, how are they going to power it with biothermal reactivity? It's somehow going to draw energy from body heat to power the chip so that it can send the signal to let everyone know where it is.
You see, these special Bill Gates microchips use dark lizard power, and they don't need regular power. And that's how they can use a microchip gun and shoot them into your brain at 100 yards distance. You won't even know. It's a lizard microchip. I saw it on Fox News.
Oh, that's funny. That's so funny.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.